years. How has the process of writing transformed for you over your career, over time?
It has been a really interesting process. I started very young. When I was a kid, I always thought that writers were dead people. You didn't have access to them, only through books. And then at some point I realized that writers were people like the people I knew, like my dad, my uncles, my teachers. And as soon as that epiphany happened to me when I was young, I thought that maybe I could be a writer. And when I was a kid, I used to love poetry, and I started to write poetry. I used to memorize poems. I used to recite them for my mom and so on. And then I started writing poetry when I was a teenager. And as I grew up, I started to search for different ways of conveying what I was going through at that specific moment in my life. So it's always been an ongoing, changing, interesting process.
With the poetry that you've done, and poetry is such a, I think, a creative, but also can be such a difficult art. Do you feel, did you choose the poetry, or do you feel it chose you in a way?
No, I think that thinking that poetry chose me would be too vain on my part. No, I'm not a great poet. That's why I don't write poetry anymore. I'm a good poet. Sometimes people have told me that I'm a very good poet, but I'm not a...
The library will be closing in 30 minutes. If you have books or materials to check out,
we won't put that in your tape, I promise. I know you always get asked the same things, but I have to. I will ask you about your new novel, but I have to ask you about Tattoo.
Yeah, fine.
Do you have any tattoos? Can I show you? Don't film this. I usually don't tell anyone this.
On the camera.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
The first line of my novel, The Tattoo Hunter, says, "A tattoo is not a mark imprinted upon the skin, but rather upon the idea that someone has about himself." So you don't tattoo your skin, you tattoo your imagination. You make a statement about some ideal part of you. A tattoo is full of longing, of hope. And that's what makes it poetic. Not all tattoos, because if you go to St. Quentin, you're not going to find maybe a lot of poetry there. Maybe you will, I may be wrong. But I think that there is a kind of tattoo that can be very meaningful. Transformation.
Right. How did it come to you to write about it?
I was interested in language and the erotic. So I figured that the coming together of graphisms and some kind of sign coming together with the skin, the human skin, would have to be a very successful metaphor to play with. So the Tattoo Hunter is a story about someone who is interested in the art of seduction. The Tattoo Hunter hunts for meaning, but to do that he has to hunt for women.
We won't ruin the plot with revealing whether or not that was successful. I wanted to ask you about your new novel, Immortal. Tell us a little bit, what was your inspiration?
Mortality. As soon as you begin to realize that you're someone who's going to die, then I think you begin to appreciate and understand a lot of things in life. When someone dies in your family or when you're exposed to death, you begin to understand a lot of things that you can when you're younger, when you don't have to face death. So I try to speculate with the life of someone who would not die. How would that person react in the face of mortality? When someone who's lived forever has to all of a sudden deal with death, a big change in that awareness comes to this person. So that's pretty much the premise of that book.
And not to be cliche, but was the process of writing this book, was it transformative or therapeutic for you?
No, it was a lot of fun because it's a kind of a comic book. I wanted to write it as a Mexican historieta, which is the Mexican comics that we have. So I created a character that's very outrageous. So it was a lot of fun. Yeah.
And last question, so people coming to your webpage, wanting your fans, your readers, but also just those new aspiring writers yearning to get their work out there but don't know how or too afraid, what would you say to them?
Just find the authors that will speak to you. You have to go to a library, at a bookstore, and find your family, because books are just like the people you know in real life. And you don't have to read, the entire canon to figure out where do you come from, what's your king, what's your lineage. So find your own lineage and try to follow on those steps.